Right now, almost everybody in women's tennis seems to be talking about the same familiar names. Iga Swiatek, Aryna Sabalenka, Coco Gauff, Mira Andreeva, the champions, the hitters, the teenage phenoms, the players who already feel built for headlines, promo reels, big stages, and primetime tennis coverage. But while the spotlight keeps swinging toward the obvious names, something much quieter is happening on grass. Alex Eala is becoming a problem, and not the loud kind of problem. Not the kind that announces itself with racket smashes, viral arguments, dramatic press conferences, or a giant media machine forcing her into every conversation before the results are ready. No, this is a young player from the Philippines stepping onto grass, one of the trickiest surfaces in tennis, where timing can vanish after one bad bounce, where the ball stays low, where the court feels fast, slippery, and unforgiving. And she is not just hanging around, she is winning. Cleanly, quickly, calmly. In the kind of way that makes you look at the draw, then look again, and ask the question casual fans have not asked loudly enough yet. Why is nobody talking about Alex Eala like this? Because that is the strange part. In a sport that is always searching for the next big thing, Eala still feels like a side story. She is not framed as one of the main faces of the WTA future. She is not always placed in the middle of those conversations about the next power shift. She is not treated like the type of player who could suddenly make a seeded opponent very uncomfortable on the wrong day. But maybe that is exactly what makes this so dangerous. Maybe tennis is waiting for one dramatic breakout, one huge upset, one viral highlight, one match where a famous player looks across the net and realizes that the player standing there is no longer just promising. She is a problem, and grass might be the surface where that truth arrives faster than people are ready for. So the real question is not simply whether Alex Eala is playing well right now. The bigger question is this. What if the WTA is not ahead of the Alex Eala story? What if it is already behind it? And the more you look at this run, the less it feels like a surprise. It starts to feel like a warning. To understand why this matters, you have to understand what Alex Eala is carrying every time she walks onto court. She is not just another young player having a good week. She is carrying a country. She is carrying expectation. She is carrying the weight of a tennis academy legacy connected to one of the heaviest names this sport has ever known. And she is carrying the pressure of proving that her rise is not just a feel-good story people mention for 5 minutes before moving on. For a casual American tennis fan, Alex Eala might still feel like a name near the edge of the screen. Maybe you have heard she is from the Philippines. Maybe you have heard she trained at the Rafael Nadal Academy. Maybe her name popped up in a tournament result and you thought, okay, promising player, nice win, maybe we will see where this goes. But for the people who have followed her longer, the pressure has never been that simple. When you come from a country that has waited for a tennis figure to break through on the world stage, every win becomes more than a win. Every loss feels heavier than a loss. Every step forward carries the emotion of fans who are not just watching a player. They are watching a possibility. That is what makes Eala different. She is not coming from one of the usual tennis factories. Not the United States, not Spain, not France, not the Czech Republic, not Russia, not Belarus. She is coming from a place where a WTA breakthrough does not feel routine. It feels historic. It feels personal. It feels like a door opening for people who almost never get to see themselves at the center of this sport. And that matters. Because tennis is not only about who hits the cleanest forehand, who serves the biggest under pressure, or who looks most comfortable on camera. Tennis is also about who gets believed in early, who gets framed as the future, who gets endless coverage after one good week, who gets patience when the results become messy, who gets treated like a project worth waiting for. Eala has had to build her case in a quieter way, result by result, match by match, point by point. Now put grass into that story, and suddenly everything gets more interesting. Grass is not a normal surface. It does not let players settle into long, comfortable rhythms the way clay can. It does not always give you the bounce you want. It rushes you. It makes you decide before you feel ready. It turns one late step into a lost point. It rewards instinct, balance, quick hands, low movement, and emotional control. On grass, you cannot fake comfort for long. That is why Eala becoming dangerous here is not some tiny detail. If a young player can look calm on grass, that tells you something. If she can keep the ball low, stay disciplined, protect her service games, and not let the speed of the surface overwhelm her, that tells you even more. And if she can do it while the spotlight is still not fully on her, then you may be watching something form before the public narrative catches up. That is the feeling around her run in Birmingham. She is not just stacking wins, she is making those wins look controlled. She is moving through matches without the emotional chaos that often follows young players on difficult surfaces. She is not turning every match into a survival mission. She looks like she understands what the grass is asking from her. That is the part people should pay attention to. Because grass season is brutal. It is short. It moves fast. One week you are trying to find your feet, and the next week Wimbledon is already staring at you. There is no long runway. There is no gentle adjustment period. You either adapt quickly or the surface exposes you. So far, Eala is not looking exposed. She is looking sharper. That does not mean she is suddenly the favorite for everything. It does not mean she is ready to walk through the biggest names in the sport tomorrow, but it does mean the conversation around her should be different. Because the WTA is in a strange place right now. The established stars still dominate the headlines. Swiatek still gives the tour a standard. Sabalenka still brings that overwhelming force. Golf still carries American attention in a way very few players can. And behind them, a new generation is fighting for space, fighting to be seen as more than potential. Eala is part of that fight, but she is doing it from the outside lane. No massive American hype machine, no easy media template, no weekly debate on every major tennis show, just results. And sometimes that is the most dangerous kind of rise. Because by the time people finally start talking loudly, the player has already become real. So if you are watching this and thinking, wait, why have I not heard more about her? That is exactly the point. Drop a comment with the player you think the tennis world is sleeping on right now, because Eala may not be the only one, but she might be the one whose story is moving faster than the spotlight. And if this were only about one good tournament, it would be easy to dismiss. The problem is, the way she is winning makes the story much harder to ignore. The first clue came in the way the match started. Not with a highlight, not with some viral winner, not with one of those perfect slow-motion clips where the ball flies off the strings and everybody suddenly decides a player is special. It came in a game where Alex Eala could have lost control before the match had even settled. That is where grass can be cruel. You walk onto court. You are still trying to feel the bounce. You are still trying to find your timing. You are still trying to understand how fast the ball is moving through the surface. Then suddenly, before you even get a real breath, danger is already there. Break points, pressure, a match trying to tilt away from you before you have even found your rhythm. For a young player, that can turn emotional fast. One loose service game becomes frustration. Frustration becomes rushed decisions. Rushed decisions become a set that disappears before you even understand what happened. And on grass, that spiral moves even faster, because the surface does not give you time to slowly repair mistakes. But Eala did not let the opening define the match. She absorbed it. She got through it. Then the whole tone changed. That is the first layer of the problem. How many young players can survive that kind of early pressure without letting the match become emotional? Because this is where the story separates itself from a simple scoreline. A 6-3, 6-2 win can look clean after it is over. It can look routine. It can look like one player was simply better from the first ball to the last. But tennis matches are not lived through the final score. They are lived through the moments before the score makes sense. The tight first game. The early danger. The point where a player has to decide whether the match is going to become a panic test or a control test. Eala chose control, and that matters more than the numbers alone. Because when you watch young players rise, the talent usually shows up before the discipline. You can see the clean backhand. You can see the speed. You can see the timing when everything feels comfortable. But the real question is always the same. What happens when comfort disappears? What happens when the match asks for patience before it gives you rhythm? What happens when the scoreboard tries to scare you early? That is where Eala is becoming interesting. Not because she never feels pressure. Every player feels it. Every player hears the scoreboard. Every player knows when the match is starting to lean the wrong way. But Eala is beginning to look like someone who can feel pressure without obeying it. That is a different skill. Then comes the second layer. After she escaped the early danger, she did not need to turn the match into a fireworks show. She did not need to win every point with a highlight. She did not need to make the court feel like a theater for drama. She simply started taking pieces of the match away. A little more depth, a little more patience, a little more pressure on return, a little more calm when the rally asked for one extra ball. And slowly the match stopped looking even. That is the quiet danger. Some players beat you loudly. They overpower you. They make the crowd gasp. They make every point feel like a collision. Eala, at least in this run, has been doing something more uncomfortable. She makes the match feel smaller for the opponent. The windows get tighter. The safe shots stop feeling safe. The service games start feeling heavier. And before the opponent has some dramatic breakdown, the match is already slipping away. That is why the grass angle matters so much. Grass does not always reward the most obvious player. It does not always reward the biggest hitter in the cleanest way. It rewards the player who can take the ball early enough, stay low enough, think quickly enough, and avoid the emotional traps that come when points move too fast. On clay, you can grind your way back into a match. On hard court, you can sometimes reset through rhythm. On grass, one bad service game can feel like a trap door. So when Eala looks calm there, it raises a serious question. What happens when a player stops looking like a prospect and starts looking like someone who knows exactly how to close? That question becomes even sharper when you look backward. Because this is not the first time grass has brought Alex Eala close to something bigger. Last year, she reached a final on grass at Eastbourne. That changed the shape of the conversation around her. It was not just another promising week. It was a glimpse of what her game could become on a surface that exposes hesitation. But she did not finish the job. And that matters. Because in tennis, losing a first big final can do one of two things. It can become a scar, or it can become information. For some players, that kind of loss stays in the body. They start seeing the finish line before they reach it. They press. They overthink. They feel the old match come back every time another opportunity appears. But for others, the loss becomes a map. It shows them where the game was still unfinished. It shows them which moments got too big. It shows them that reaching the final was not the ceiling. It was only the first proof that the path existed. So when Eala comes back to grass and starts winning with more control, you have to ask the uncomfortable question. Was last year the ceiling, or was it just the first warning sign? Because if Eastbourne was the emotional preview, Birmingham starts to look like the correction. That is where the mystery gets deeper. Maybe this is not random momentum. Maybe grass is not just a surface she happens to enjoy. Maybe it is revealing a version of her game that is easier to underestimate than to stop. A left-handed rhythm that can bother opponents. A calmness that keeps matches from turning chaotic. A willingness to play the extra ball without letting go of aggression. A growing sense that she does not need to announce herself with noise. She can announce herself by making another player uncomfortable for 90 minutes. And that is exactly the kind of player tennis media often misses at first. The loud breakout gets attention. The shocking upset gets attention. The player with the massive serve or huge forehand gets attention. But the player who becomes a problem quietly, who adjusts without drama, who wins without turning every match into a viral moment, that player can stay hidden longer than she should. Until suddenly, she is not hidden anymore. Suddenly, she is in the draw of a bigger event. Suddenly, she is standing across the net from a seeded player. Suddenly, the favorite is the one looking uncomfortable. and everyone watching asks the same question at the same time. Where did this come from? But the answer is usually already there. It was in the early break points she saved. It was in the way she refused to rush after surviving danger. It was in the way last year's disappointment started to look less like heartbreak and more like preparation. That is what makes this problem complicated. It is not one match. It is not one stat. It is not one emotional storyline. It is the combination of surface, timing, pressure, and a player whose growth is not happening loudly enough for everyone to notice in real time. And if the American tennis conversation is still waiting for the perfect breakout moment before it takes Alex Eala seriously, it may already be late. Because by the time a quiet problem becomes obvious, someone important has usually already been hurt by it. At this point, the easy explanation would be to say, she is simply playing well. But that explanation feels too small for what is really happening. Here is the twist. Maybe the WTA world is not ignoring Alex Eala because she has no story. Maybe it is ignoring her because her story does not look like the kind of story tennis media is used to selling. That is the part people miss. In modern tennis, stars often arrive through familiar doors. An American teenager gets attention because the American audience already knows how to rally around that. A dominant champion gets attention because dominance is easy to package. A power hitter gets attention because power is simple to see. A prodigy from a major tennis country gets attention because the system already knows where to place her. But Eala does not fit neatly into any of those boxes. She is not Coco Gauff, carrying the weight of American expectation in front of an American media machine. She is not Iga Swiatek, built around total control and the pressure of being the standard. She is not Aryna Sabalenka, the obvious force of power and intimidation. She is not Mira Andreeva, the teenage mystery tennis fans love to project into the future. Eala is different, quieter, more cross-cultural, harder to explain in one sentence. A Filipino player shaped in the orbit of the Rafael Nadal Academy, carrying national pride, junior promise, professional pressure, and the strange burden of being both known and still under-discussed. That is a complicated story, and complicated stories are often slow to get promoted, because the tennis world likes simple labels. The next Serena, the next Sharapova, the next Swiatek, the next great American hope, the next teenage superstar. But what happens when a player does not feel like the next version of someone else? What happens when she is not loud enough for the highlight machine, not familiar enough for casual fans, and not dominant enough yet for the mainstream to stop everything and look? That is where Eala has been living. In the space between promise and proof, between national hero and global threat, between being admired by the people who know and being overlooked by the people who only follow the biggest names, and grass might be the surface that breaks that space open. Because grass does not care about branding. Grass does not care who got the better promotional video. Grass does not care whose name trends faster. Grass asks a different question. Can you react before the ball gets on top of you? Can you stay low when the bounce betrays you? Can you keep your hands calm when the point is moving faster than your nerves want it to? Can you make good decisions when there is no time to look comfortable? That is why Eala becoming dangerous on grass feels so important. It does not need a massive media campaign to be real. It shows up in small moments. A saved break point. A return that lands just deep enough. A rally where she refuses to be rushed. A service game where she looks like she has already made peace with the pressure. At first, that kind of player does not scare the tour. Then she becomes annoying. Then she becomes dangerous. Then someone seated walks off court wondering why the match never felt under control. Think about rain on a grass court. At first, it is just a few drops. Nobody panics. The players keep moving. The crowd barely reacts. The match continues because nothing looks dramatic enough to stop it. But drop by drop, the conditions change. The footing changes. The bounce changes. The whole match changes before everyone fully agrees that something has happened. That is what Eala feels like right now. Not a lightning strike. Rain. Quiet at first. easy to dismiss at first. But once the surface changes, everyone has to adjust. And if you have stayed with the story this long, think about that for a second. Is Alex Eala really being overlooked because she has not done enough? Or is she being overlooked because her rise does not look like the kind of rise tennis media usually knows how to sell? Drop your answer in the comments, because that question changes the entire way you watch her matches. And once you see her through that lens, the matches stop looking random. They start looking like evidence. Because the most dangerous version of Alex Eala is not the one that needs the world to crown her early. It is the one that keeps improving while people are still deciding whether she deserves the spotlight. That is the player nobody wants to see across the net on grass. Not because she is unbeatable, not because she is already complete, but because she is learning how to make discomfort look normal. She does not have to dominate every point. She does not have to overpower every opponent. She does not have to create chaos. She only has to keep asking the same question over and over. Are you comfortable yet? And if the answer is no, grass makes that feeling worse. That is the aha moment. The WTA may not be missing Eala because she is invisible. It may be missing her because she is developing in a language the spotlight has not learned to speak yet. But evidence has a way of becoming louder than narrative. And once you start following the evidence, it points to something even harder to ignore. So what is the proof? It is not just the scoreline. Scorelines can lie. A 6-3, 6-2 win can make a match look simple after it is over. It can erase the danger that existed before the match settled. It can make pressure disappear from memory. It can turn a difficult opening into a clean result. But the proof is in the moments before the scoreline becomes comfortable. That is where you learn what a player is becoming. And with Alex Eala, the first piece of proof is emotional control. Think about the opening danger against Manachaya Sawangkaew in Birmingham. Early break points, early pressure, early chances for the match to tilt the wrong way. That is not just a scoreboard detail. That is a psychological test. Because when a young player is trying to build a grass court run, the first few games can feel enormous. The ball is skidding. The timing is fragile. The court is asking for quick decisions before the body feels fully settled. And if the opponent gets an early break, suddenly the match is not about tactics anymore. It becomes about nerves. Eala passed that test. She did not let the opening become the story. She survived it, then took control. That is what mature players do. They do not always avoid danger. They stop danger from becoming identity. That difference is everything. Because a player who never faces pressure might only look calm because nothing has gone wrong. But a player who faces pressure, escapes it, and then plays cleaner afterward is showing something deeper. She is showing that panic is not in charge. The second proof is the way her game fits the surface. Grass is not kind to hesitation. It exposes players who need too much time. It punishes late footwork. It takes away the luxury of long preparation. It makes the ball stay low, skid through, and rush the strike zone. That is why Eala liking the low bounce is not a throwaway detail. It matters. Some players step on grass and immediately look like they are negotiating with the court. Every bounce feels like a surprise. Every movement feels half a step late. Every rally feels like a problem they did not ask for. Eala does not look like that. She looks like a player who can accept what grass gives her. She can take the ball early enough to avoid being rushed. She can use the left-handed rhythm to pull opponents into awkward contact points. She can keep rallies from turning into pure power contests. And most importantly, she can make the match feel uncomfortable without making her own game look desperate. That is a very specific kind of threat, not loud, not obvious, but real. Because on grass, discomfort multiplies. If your opponent does not like the bounce, she feels it on the next point. If she starts rushing, she feels it in the next service game. If she loses trust in her timing, suddenly even routine shots feel dangerous. Eala is learning how to live in that space. And if she can live there calmly, opponents have to play the match while fighting two battles at once. The player across the net, and the surface under their feet. The third proof is progression. This is the part that makes the story bigger than 1 week. Last year, grass gave Eala a glimpse of something. She reached a final at Eastbourne, and for a young player trying to prove she belonged at the professional level, that kind of run matters. It tells you the game is there. It tells you the surface might not be a problem. It tells you the path exists, but she did not finish it. And that is where the story could have gone in a different direction. A missed title chance can become a shadow. It can follow a player into the next opportunity. It can make every lead feel fragile. It can make every tight game feel like a memory trying to repeat itself. But when Eala returned to grass and started winning with more control, it suggested something important. She did not just remember the disappointment. She used it. That is what you want to see from a player who is still unfinished. Not perfection, response, growth, correction. The most dangerous young players are not the ones who never lose. They are the ones who lose, absorb the lesson, and come back with fewer cracks in the same situation. That is why Birmingham feels like evidence, not a final answer. Evidence. Evidence that Eastbourne was not just a random hot week. Evidence that the grass court comfort was not imaginary. Evidence that the pressure of being watched by a country, carrying a famous academy background, and trying to break through on a global tour is not freezing her. It may be hardening her. And this is where the original question starts to close in. Why might the WTA world be slow to treat Alex Eala like a real problem? Because tennis coverage often waits for proof that is impossible to ignore. A win over a superstar, a viral upset, a deep run at Wimbledon, a post-match quote that travels across social media. But tennis itself usually gives the warning signs earlier. Before the big headline, there is the match where a player stops panicking. Before the upset, there is the week where the service games get cleaner. Before the global conversation, there is the small tournament where the draw starts to bend around someone nobody was watching closely enough. That is where Eala is right now. She is not being sold as the finished product. And honestly, that might be the scariest thing about her. Because if she were already complete, the story would be easier to measure. You could say this is the ceiling. You could say this is what she is. You could decide where she belongs. But Eala still feels unfinished. Her serve can still grow. Her point construction can still sharpen. Her physical strength can still develop. Her experience in big matches can still deepen. And yet, even while unfinished, she is already good enough to make grass look like a place where she can hurt people. That is the hidden threat. With some young players, unfinished means unstable. With Eala, unfinished might mean the ceiling is still moving. That is the reward for paying attention early. You are not watching a completed star trying to defend an image. You are watching a player whose image is still forming, whose game is still expanding, whose best version may not even be visible yet. And that makes her much harder to prepare for. Because how do you scout a player who is changing quickly? How do you build a plan for someone who is learning from the exact situations that used to stop her? How do you dismiss a player who keeps turning pressure into evidence? That is why the phrase grass court problem matters. It does not mean Eala is unbeatable. It means she is becoming the kind of draw that makes people uncomfortable before the match even starts. The kind of player who might not dominate the tournament poster, but can quietly ruin the tournament path. The kind of player a seeded opponent does not want to see early, because there is no simple emotional advantage. No easy intimidation. No guarantee that pressure will make her disappear. And now, the loop from the beginning starts to close. The WTA may not be ignoring Alex Eala because there is nothing there. It may be ignoring her because the evidence is still quieter than the headline machine. But quiet evidence is still evidence. The saved pressure points. The comfort with the low bounce. The growth from last year's grass disappointment. The controlled wins. The unfinished ceiling. Put those together, and Birmingham stops looking like a small moment. It starts looking like a signal. A warning before Wimbledon. A warning before a bigger name finds out too late. And that brings us back to the question we started with. If Alex Eala is becoming this dangerous, how long can the tennis world keep treating her like a side story? So maybe the WTA is not ignoring Alex Eala because she is invisible. Maybe it is ignoring her because the spotlight has not caught up to the scoreboard yet. That is the answer to the mystery. Eala does not need the loudest narrative to become dangerous. She does not need to be the face of every promo. She does not need to be treated like the next guaranteed superstar before she earns the bigger stage. She only needs to keep doing what she is already doing. Walk onto grass, stay calm when the match gets uncomfortable, take away rhythm, make the opponent feel rushed, survive the pressure points that usually break young players. Then leave the court with another result that makes people look twice. That is how a side story becomes a main story, slowly at first. Then suddenly, and if this grass court run keeps building, the label around Eala may change faster than people expect. Not nice story. Not promising player. Not just the Filipino breakthrough. Not just the Rafael Nadal Academy graduate. Dangerous draw. That is the phrase that changes everything. Because a dangerous draw is not always the player with the biggest ranking or the loudest reputation. Sometimes it is the player nobody wants early. The player who makes the favorite work too hard. The player who turns a clean path into a trap. The player who arrives without the full spotlight, then leaves with the match everyone is talking about. That is where Eala could be headed. And the emotional part is that she does not have to become someone else to get there. She does not have to manufacture drama. She does not have to scream for attention. She does not have to play tennis like a headline. She can build the story the hard way, point by point, hold by hold, match by match. And for a player carrying a country, an academy label, a history of expectation, and the silence of an international media world that still has not fully caught up, that might be the most powerful version of the story. Because the real problem for the WTA is not that Alex Eala is already complete, it is that she is still becoming. And if she is already this uncomfortable on grass before her game fully settles, then the question is not whether people will eventually notice. They will. The question is who has to lose to her before they finally do. So watch the next draw carefully. Watch the body language of the opponent across the net. Watch the first pressure game. Watch what happens when someone thinks they can rush her, bully her, or wait for the nerves to show up. Because if Birmingham is only the beginning, then the next player who underestimates Alex Eala may be the one who finally makes the whole tennis world look. And if you want to follow the next chapter before the spotlight catches up, subscribe here, because the answer to this story is probably coming on court before it comes from the media.